welcome to Dawai Kudroen. I have right in front of me Dr. Phuntsho, who is one of the most well-versed and a very articulate historian. And Dr. Phuntsho and me, we have been talking about 3 books launched on the 21st of February, coinciding with His Majesty's birthday. One is on the autobiography of Theten Pemalingpa, the biography of Gyaltse Pemathile, and the biography of Thukse Dawa Gyaltsen. 3 books launched, and Dr. Phuntsho had actually edited all these 3 books, and some interesting facts that we have not heard before. For most Bhutanese, not most, but for at least for somebody like me, I would like to believe that the biographies of Gyaltse Pemathile and Thukse Dawa Gyaltsen are new information for me. Likewise, this could be same to many other Bhutanese. Theten Pemalingpa, yes, many Bhutanese have heard about it, but there are some other interesting unheard facts that we will get to listen, or we will get to hear from Dr. Phuntsho. So, Dr. Phuntsho, thank you so much for your time. Maybe to start with, just like we did in Zonka, your intention for editing and publishing these 3 autobiographies and biography.
So, I was running a program of digitizing Bhutan's written heritage, mainly the rare manuscripts that are located in our temple archives,
Yes.
and also doing a compilation, a new collection of Theten Pemalingpa's teachings and writings. And in process of that, we encountered quite a lot of manuscripts
Yes.
that talk about the lives of lamas in the past, and especially very important lamas such as Pemalingpa, his son Dawa Gyaltsen, and his grandson Pemathile. And because these figures have a great significance in our history and for our society even now, and because these biographies contain a lot of information about their times, about their world, we thought it would be worthwhile to bring out these manuscripts in a very nicely presented typeface in a modern book format,
Yes.
so that people can have access to these biographies. Now, these biographies in Bhutan would be called as namthars. Namthar literally means liberation. So it's
Yes.
liberation through reading or through hearing the life stories of these masters. And there are lots of people in Bhutan who are interested in reading these biographies, but they don't have access to these books. And then as Bhutan's popularity grows in the world, there are also lots of scholars and researchers who are interested in knowing more about Bhutan and its past. And they, again, don't have access to the rare manuscripts and archives.
Yes.
So the main objective for us, me and my co-editors, to bring out these biographies, not only these 3, there are many other biographies that we hope to bring out in the future, is to provide access to these wonderful historical sources to the wider Bhutanese audience, and particularly the scholars and researchers working on Bhutan and the Himalayan culture.
Yes. Doctor, talking about Theten Pemalingpa, his influence ran not just in Bhutan but beyond borders, and the historical significance, the socio-economic significance that actually were attributed to this treasure discoverer, Theten Pemalingpa. Elaborate a bit on this, his influence beyond border.
The main significance of bringing these biographies out, especially Pemalingpa's biography out, is that we do know who Pemalingpa is, roughly. Most Bhutanese have heard the name Pemalingpa. We know he is one of our great ancestors, a great lama, but we lack the details. So we don't appreciate the figure of Pemalingpa as much as we should. Now, if we really look at Pemalingpa's life and works, he had a stature and influence, even during his lifetime,
Yes.
that surpasses all other Bhutanese. I mean, there was never anyone in the history of Bhutan who was born in the land of Bhutan, or in those days we were not really a unified country, but in the land that modern Bhutan occupies, there was no one as influential and as well respected as Pema Lingpa, both at home and beyond our borders.
Yes.
So Pema Lingpa was unique in starting, one could say, a new era even. Because until Pema Lingpa's days, there were no political or religious figures who had great influence, who had such a high status in the Bhutanese society or beyond. In the 15th century, as Pema Lingpa started to rise as a treasure discoverer and a teacher, he basically brought the land of Bhutan, gave the land of Bhutan a new status. People around Bhutan suddenly noticed that the country of Bhutan has a rich religious heritage, can produce such a important, holy, learned, versatile figure as Pema Lingpa. So one could say Pema Lingpa more or less placed the land of Bhutan on a cultural map in the greater Himalayan region. And to use this concept or this practice as an example, I used this during the Dzongkha session as well, I'll use it again, the Chön culture. Now, in old days in Tibet, they had a very strong tradition of Chön. Chön being Chödne, or the priest, the Lama, and Yuen being the Yuendak, the patron, the priest-patron relationship. Tibetan Lamas are often the priest of Mongol or Chinese patrons. In the same way, they were priests of the Bhutanese patrons. Bhutanese in the Lokhashi region, in say about 1,000 years ago, in the 11th, 12th century, were patrons of the Lama Lhapa, who were based somewhere north of Paro. Then later on, we were the patrons of the priest of Ralung. So most of the time, we had priests coming from India or Tibet, but we didn't have our own foremost priest figure here. But with Pema Lingpa, you see a Bhutanese high priest rising, and all the other political and religious figures around Bhutan becoming patrons. So you, even in the practice of the priest-patron relationship, Pema Lingpa starts a new era for Bhutan. And then his descendants, like Dawa Gyaltsen, Gyaltse Pema Thinley, they continue that legacy.
Yes.
So for Bhutan, he is an exceptionally important figure in how he has historically contributed to the status of Bhutan. Then more importantly, for the legacies, he left behind a family line that has now spread to most parts of Bhutan, and we have even our own royal family descending or descendants of his family. He has left behind cultural legacies. The marks dances we perform, quite a lot of them originated in Pema Lingpa. The arts and crafts that we have, a lot of them also go back to Pema Lingpa. He was a master blacksmith, master silversmith, carpenter, mason. He was a really talented person. And above all, he was a great religious figure, a teacher who didn't go through formal education, but who produced so many writings which were composed by himself, and also discovered so many treasures. So the religious corpus that he has left behind, which we call the Peling Terchue now, or Peling Chokor, is an astounding legacy that he has left behind. And these philosophies, principles and practices inform us today, shape our personality. So in many ways, we should know that Pema Lingpa is one of the greatest ancestors, and he continues to influence our values, principles and cultures. And it seems that most of the country doesn't quite realize that.
Yes.
He's just another one of the Tertens,
Yes.
one of the Lamas. He's not seen and given the due credit that he deserves.
Yes. Dr. Karma, given the tall profile that Pema Lingpa had, and also the kind of versatile and very prolific attributes that you just mentioned, today when you look at the different traditions that we have, Peling tradition somehow, there could be some critics who would believe that this Peling tradition somehow seems to be diminishing. Would you agree to that?
To some extent, yes, because probably the influence Pema Lingpa and his descendants had in the past is no longer true,
Yes.
or no longer to the same extent. For instance, in the generation after Pema Lingpa, his teachings, his tradition was also very popular in Western Bhutan. And today that's not really the case.
Yes.
People like Hephutuku of Paro, Tetun Sringdorji of Dongkala, they were all students of Pema Lingpa's son.
Yes.
But the Pema Lingpa tradition has diminished a little bit perhaps, but that's more because there are other more interesting, more influential traditions that came to Bhutan after Pema Lingpa. So we have the Drukpa Kagyu tradition, which came to Bhutan even before Pema Lingpa, but got established as the state religion or state tradition, so to say, during Shabdung's time. Then much later, in the 17th and 18th centuries, we see the arrival of even Nyingma traditions like Ningthik, which became much more influential and pervasive. Then more recently, we have the Tersara tradition coming from Dijum Lingpa. So maybe it's due to the arrival of these new traditions that the Pema Lingpa influence has slightly declined. But then, having said that, the general Buddhist theory, which Pema Lingpa would have also advocated, is that whatever helps you best, whatever is good for your interest, your temperament, your caliber, is the religion, is the tradition that's right for you. So there's the fact that we bring out Pema Lingpa and his tradition as a homegrown local tradition shouldn't imply that other traditions are irrelevant to the Bhutanese.
Yes. Yes. Maybe we didn't get to talk much about Geshe Pema Tile during Dzongkha sessions. Geshe Pema Tile was the grandson of Pema Lingpa, and then that's all we know.
Yes. So Pema Lingpa basically left behind 5 sons,
Yes.
according to this biography, which is mostly autobiography. He wrote most of it, and even the rest that he didn't write was more or less ready by the time he passed away. Only the last part, talking about his death and funeral services, are not known to him or were written after him. So one would say that this biography is a very reliable source for describing not only his life but the society in his time in the area that's occupied by Bhutan and southern Tibet right now. So according to this, there are 5 sons, and one of the sons become his main spiritual heir, and that's
Yes.
Dawa Gelsen. So that's Tuse Dawa Gelsen. The second biography is about him. Then his son is Pema Thinley. Pema Thinley has a very interesting sort of birth and upbringing, in that we don't quite know whether he was born to his mother Butri when Butri was with Dawa Gelsen, or whether his mother was with the second Pema Lingpa, Tenzin Rakpa, when he was born, and then Dawa Gelsen somehow fathered him. we are not clear on that, but he is considered a common son, common heir of both Dawa Gelsen and Tenzin Rakpa. Dawa Gelsen is the physical heir of Pema Lingpa. Tenzin Rakpa is the Chulku, the incarnation of Pema Lingpa. So he grows up under these 2 figures, very influential figures in those days. Then he, of course, receives most of his training from some of the senior disciples of Pema Lingpa.
Yes.
One very interesting feature regarding Pema Thinley is that most of the hierarchs in the family were lay priests. They were married with family. But Pema Thinley chooses to be a monk. So he remained an Odeon monk. And as a result, his influences, even in monastic circles, is quite high and strong. Because as a lay priest, you don't have as much influence on the monastic followers. And I think Pema Thinley had that advantage.
Yes.
Then he, of course, spent a lot of time traveling between Bhutan and southern Tibet, probably making a journey almost every year or so. And a lot of the Tibetan temples were offered to him, which he accepted. But he was at that time going through very interesting times.
Yes.
Now, he lived in the first half of the second half of the 16th and first half of the 17th century, from 1564 to 1642. That's when Shabdrung was having his difficulties with the Tsang Desi. That's when the Tsang Desi was having difficulties with the Dalai Lamas or the Gelugpa tradition. So a lot of political turmoil and, as a result, political transitions. So Pema Thinley, who wanted to have a very good monastic base and propagate Pema Lingpa's teachings from that base, first contemplated on having a big center in Tibet.
Yes.
But with all the political changes there, he decided that Bhutan will be where he should set up his base. So sometime in the beginning of the 17th century, he came from Tibet with all his followers, with their bags, and they set up their base in Kangting. So this is how the Kangting Sangha Shuling got established. There was already a temple that he set up earlier, but he came back and expanded that temple, or rather rebuilt a bigger one. And in, I think, 1613, he finished the construction of Kangting Sangha Shuling. And that's the biggest legacy that Pema Tinle left for Bhutan.
Yes. Was he as popular as his grandfather or his father, especially beyond borders?
Yes, he was, because these three people lived in three different generations. So
Yes.
after Pema Lingpa passed away, Dawa Gyaltsen took over the role of being the main patriarch of the Pema Lingpa tradition. So he was received by Tibetan rulers. He was teacher to a lot of great Tibetan lamas. And when Dawa Gyaltsen passed away, Pema Tinle took over that role as the chief patriarch of the Peling tradition. So he had a lot of influence in Tibet. But unlike his grandfather, Pema Lingpa, and father, Dawa Gyaltsen, he was not presented really as a Tertön.
Yes.
But he was an Odeon celibate monk. He was a great scholar, and he was a very good institution builder.
Yes. Yes. Maybe to come back to Teten Pema Lingpa, Doctor, if you could just briefly flipping through the pages, found out that he had quite an extraordinary, or rather interesting childhood. Pema Lingpa. He had so many nicknames. He, let's say, of course, out of respect, but he used to be a naughty child during his childhood days. So, briefly.
Yes, these are the very interesting details that we can find in the biography, and that's why I think the biography is out, and people who are interested can avail it from Peling Chugi Katsel, who sponsored the publication. But what we really find is details about his own life and also society and life in those days.
Yes.
And interestingly, the autobiography is not like other namthars, where it's full of praises. Even when Pema Lingpa writes about himself, he is quite frank about saying that he was a willful child, a stubborn child, very naughty, that his father called him Teplang and his mother called him Suze. Suze is probably a bit like Sunam Kam Kam that we use now. And then other people called him Zingi Kelpa Dendrupur. So very interesting information we get about the sort of culture of giving nicknames, and perhaps some of them also terms of affection.
Yes.
And then he grows up without receiving any formal education. He, in one incident, manages to peep over to look at a book that somebody else is reading. And he says that he could not only recognize but immediately memorize all the alphabets and letters in that book. So he was an extraordinarily talented, intelligent young man.
Yes.
And some of the lamas already noticed that feature, that characteristics in him. And so they, for instance, Lama Chuing, who was Tukse of, who was a hot son of Dorje Lingpa, he already said when Pema Lingpa was a child that this young child, this baby, is going to benefit the Buddhist teachings and sentient beings.
Yes. Yes. Doctor, maybe to entice readers to go through the details of Pema Lingpa's autobiography and the two biographies of Gyaltsen Pema Tinle and Tukse Dawa Gyaltsen, if you could share maybe one or two striking instances where Pema Lingpa had some miraculous achievements. There could be many. Looking at the size of the book, the thickness of the book, there could be many. But if you could, as a matter of teaser to all the readers, share a few.
Yes. Well, all three books contain a long introduction in English by me. And I primarily wrote that with the intention to tease people, stimulate people who read in English, to invite them to read the original story. It's much better to hear the story from the horse's mouth. So there is a teaser, you would say that. There's so many interesting episodes there. One point I will reiterate is these three figures really started a new chapter for Bhutan, gave Bhutan an unknown, unprecedented status. And they are the three big figures of the 16th century Bhutan. And their life stories have a lot to tell us of what our past was like and what our future should be. In terms of Pema Lingpa's own life, he emerged as a treasure discoverer, one of the most popular, most respected treasure discoverers. But he didn't manage to get that status easily. It was a life full of struggles, a lot of challenges. There were lots of critics, a lot of people who were skeptical of his treasure discovery. So we have instances in Pema Lingpa's biography of how he was accused, for instance, of extracting a turquoise from the statue in Chokor Lagang, which is Tselung Lagang, Phuntsho Lagang in Bhutan. We have people of Nai in Kurtue embarking on a battle, a war with Pema Lingpa for extracting treasure from their area, because when you extract a treasure, the power of the land is believed to go down.
Yes.
And then there were other lamas who were seriously antagonizing Pema Lingpa because they were jealous. So his life is full of such interesting intrigues, you could say. But at the same time, there are also episodes with so much joy and celebration. Times when Pema Lingpa felt really happy and celebrated his life events. And I think the most stark, the most outstanding episode is of him jumping into Membarso, the lake or the riverine pool, to extract the second treasure, and doing that all in a big crowd in presence of lots of people. It's called Chomter. Yes. He did a similar Chomter discovery in Tibet in the presence of the Halung Nangso, the ruler of southern Tibet at that time. So those are some interesting episodes. In one case, I found it very amusing, is when he went to Samye, his last trip to Samye, he again discovered some treasures from the statue of Vairochana in the main Samye temple. All other people have gone out, and Pema Lingpa takes the advantage, the opportunity of being alone to extract the treasure. He extracts the treasure, and then he has to plaster the statue back.
Yes.
When the caretaker rushes and helps him. And because the soil is so dry, he has to use his own pee, his urine to make the mud and plaster it. And instead of complaining, the caretaker comes and helps him, and later on also receives the blessing from Pema Lingpa using the treasure he just discovered. And on his way back, one of the great Tibetan leaders who are descendants of the Phamdrukpa rulers, they asked him to visit them and bless them. And he says, no, I'm in a rush. These friends of mine from Bumthang want to go back soon. So he declines. But then the ruler sends a silver container saying, please send us some blessing. Send us some of your feces.
Yes.
So Pema Lingpa sends his own feces as a blessing to this Tibetan ruler. So I think there would be no one in Bhutan's history, the entire history of Bhutan, who would be asked to give his feces as a blessing, except Pema Lingpa.
Yes, on this very interesting note, Dr. Kamal Phuntsho, I would like to thank you for being here on this program. Thank you once again.
Yes, thank
With
you.
this, we would like to end our program. For those who are interested in knowing more about Pema Lingpa and his son and grandson, Tukse Dawa Gelsen and Gelse Pema Tile, wish you a very happy reading. Thank you so much.